Is the plague over and no one is reporting it?
Mr. Reagan.
So I recently decided to read a little bit more about what happened a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away on the fictional planet of Turth. In my readings about the fascinating history of this planet, it had been an unusually long time since I'd heard anything about the Verona Kairos that had plagued their planet. And in particular, I was curious about how one specific country was doing, the Unified States of Emerkria. The war between Rusania and Ukrainia took up every minute of the fictional stories I was reading, and I was curious how the Emerkrians were doing as a nation with the Verona Kairos. Were they still dealing with the Omegatron variant? Were many Emerkrians being hospitalized? Were people dying? Some Deceptocrat politicians who ran local governments had dropped some restrictions, but in many places the Emerkrian people were still dealing with government orders that required school children to wear masks, and many companies still require inoculation, and some people are still being denied life-saving surgeries from some hospitals. And there are still many other restrictions and precautions lingering around the country. So what was going on exactly? Well, instead of waiting for the stories to tell me, I just checked myself. It wasn't difficult. I just typed into the most popular search engine on the planet Turth, Bing, and I typed into Bing the Verona Kairos numbers USA, Unified States of Emerkria, of course. And here's what I saw. Wait, what? I'm going to discuss this image in one moment. First, I have to sell you something. A newly discovered software flaw is possibly the most critical vulnerability of the last decade for anybody connected to the internet. This software vulnerability grants hackers, spies, and criminals easy access to customer data off countless enterprise-level websites. Security experts across the country are ringing the alarm, stating that everyone is at risk. But your privacy is in your own hands. And that's why I use Virtual Shield VPN every time I connect to the internet. Virtual Shield VPN helps protect my online data from hackers, data mining companies, my mobile carrier, my internet service provider, and even the alphabet agencies. The best part is that Virtual Shield is one of the very few VPNs with a strict no-log policy, meaning that they will not keep your search history stored on their servers. Now, I could not be more happy with the peace of mind that using a Virtual Shield VPN offers me. This month, I've partnered with the creators of Virtual Shield to give my audience 50% off for life and a free 30-day trial of Virtual Shield's VPN to celebrate the new year. Just go to virtualshield.com/Mr. Reagan or click on the link in the description below. Okay, so this is what the current state of the Verona Kairos plague looks like. How did I miss this? Guys, nobody told me that the Verona Kairos plague was over. Was it on the news? Did I somehow completely miss every reporter talking about this? Or what is going on? I mean, if this graph is correct, this is the biggest news story in the country. The Verona Kairos plague is over. You'd think that it would be headline news in every paper, the opening story on every news network for a week, and yet nothing. Well, I looked into the numbers, and from what I can gather, the Verona Kairos is still lingering around and is still deadly to some Emerkrian. The graphic here is a little deceiving because the Omegatron variant was so common that when the infection rate finally dropped, it looks like this on this low-resolution graph. It looks like it dropped to 0. And I mean, it has dropped a lot, but not quite to 0. I saw a few different numbers from a few different trackers, but basically, there are still more people dying from Verona Kairos than would die from the Turthian influenza on an average day during a normal Turthian flu season. So is the plague really over? Technically, no. And so I guess it makes sense that there hasn't been a mission accomplished ceremony.
The United States and our allies have prevailed.
But maybe there should be, because although Verona Kairos is still lingering about, it's much less deadly. Far fewer people who contracted Omegatron died. And now the Omegatron spike is over. So there they were, with a far less deadly variant, and of that variant, they had very few cases. And perhaps even more importantly, it looks like the Emerkrians couldn't really do anything more than they'd already done. They had really done everything they possibly could in order to fight this plague. Things were, at that point, as good as they were going to get. Lockdowns had done nothing. I made a video all about that a while ago. The inoculations had done however much they were able to do. You can debate about their efficacy in the comment section below if you wish, but I personally do think that they were effective for many of those who needed protection. The popular cloth masks on Turth were finally recognized as decorative by the CDC, the Coalition for Disinformation and Censorship CDC. Now, that story also went woefully unreported, so please check that out. And by one estimate, 90% of the citizens of the Unified States of Mercuria have some kind of immunity. 90%. 90% have either been inoculated or have natural immunity to the Voronavirus.
The Delta wave is so pervasive and infecting so many people that on the back end of this, we're going to have immunity in at least 85, maybe 90% of the population.
And this was subsequently verified by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. They published their estimates in December that 95% of Mercurian citizens over the age of 15 have antibodies against Voronavirus. And these estimates are from last year, before the Omegatron variant. At this point, I don't see how the Mercurians could have possibly made themselves any more protected than they already were. There was no more the Mercurians could do. They would either have to live in fear, hiding in their homes, clinging to their useless masks, or they could move on with their lives, carry on as usual, get back to normal. I reported in a recent video that new research has discovered that some people seem to have natural immunity to Voronavirus without ever having contracted it, and it could be a pretty high percentage of the population. The truth is that even if the Voronavirus is still infecting people on Earth, the Earthians have a variety of treatments to combat it, such as Paxlovid, and they can move past the lockdown, masked up, socially distanced paranoia of the year before. The state should have rescinded all laws, all executive orders, and all guidelines that were created in order to flatten the curve or slow the spread or muzzle the populace or whatever they were trying to do. Because everything that could be done had been done, and these measures were not going to be of any further use. What was really astonishing, though, is that the Mercurian politicians had recently been given an opportunity to rescind the order that required masks to be worn on airplanes, and they didn't do it. Earthians still had to wear masks on planes despite the fact that the plague was dying out, and despite the fact that the CDC, the Coalition for Disinformation and Censorship, had finally admitted that cloth masks are basically just a fashion accessory. And it wasn't as if they said, cloth masks aren't that effective. I guess we should require N95 masks that seem to work at least a little. But no, they didn't say that. And this is how you know that such requirements are not actually in the interest of public health, but rather in the interest of signaling one's virtue. For corrupt politicians, a useless policy that is perceived to work is far better than a complete lack of policy that actually improves people's quality of life through not interfering. Because you know what? If the lack of a policy is perceived as letting bad things happen, well, then the politician can't have that, because then they'll look bad. And that's the real story here, I think. There is a fear among politicians that if they do nothing, they will be perceived as having let the Voronavirus ravage the populace. And so ineffective policies are issued and reissued to keep gullible idiots comfortably deluded. But the time for political posturing is over. If it's true that 95% of the citizens of Mercuria had antibodies even before the Omegatron surge, and many people already have natural immunity and have never needed to be inoculated, and if it's true that we have effective treatment options for anyone who does still get sick, well, then the reality is that there is absolutely no excuse not to go back to normal. There's no excuse to continue to enforce any of the policies that were issued to flatten the curve or slow the spread or muzzle the populace. And there is no reason to censor anyone's views about any of this on social media, because this plague is no longer a great threat to the people of Earth. And so I say to the people of Earth, let's end idiotic policies like masks on planes and on the faces of school children. I really must insist, let's get Mercuria back to normal. Well, that's it for me, and remember, it's not that our Decepticrat friends are ignorant. It's just they know so much that is not so. Good night.
You know, someone very profoundly once said that if fascism ever comes to America, it'll come in the name of liberalism. And what is fascism? Fascism is private ownership, but total government control and regulation. Well, isn't this the liberal philosophy? The conservative, so-called, is the one that says less government. Get off my back, get out of my pocket, and let me have more control of my own destiny.